বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি।
Hello everyone, welcome to Hindu analysis for 16th August 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Memories. This is in regards to Prime Minister's announcement on August 14th that India is going to mark August 14th as Partition Horrors Remembrance Day. This is related to India and Pakistan's partition on August 14th of 1947. So the announcement from Prime Minister was followed by a Gazette notification making it a day of importance, in the sense that we are going to henceforth identify August 14th as Partition Horrors Remembrance Day to observe the lives lost during the partition of India and Pakistan. Conservative estimates put around 2 million people being killed in the most brutalest of the ways possible, and it is estimated that 1 lakh women were kidnapped and subsequently raped, and in total more than 15 million men, women and children being displaced from their homes because of this partition that the British government gave as a gift to India before leaving. To give you an estimate as to how many people were killed, remember this is 1947, and this is the conservative estimate that various people did come up with, and the number in largely and in reality can be far higher than what we are reading about it today. The decision was made during the by the British government that they are going to partition the country into two countries, and subsequently people were forced to flee their homes with whatever they were wearing on their backs, and they had to leave their childhood homes, their property, and in some cases even family members because of this partition. So this was kind of the infliction that the resentment that the British government held against India, and this was the final shot that they took at the new emerging country, that is India. The memories of those days are still imprinted on many of our elders who were part of that transplanting from erstwhile Pakistan or erstwhile frontiers of India into the new India. The violence that followed this decision was the most brutalest of the ways, because it essentially put Indians against Indians, particularly since the partition entirely was done on communal lines. What essentially happened was that Hindus and Sikhs were pitted against Muslims, and it was brothers fighting brothers. Now, one of the biggest fallouts from the partition was that the highest amount of violence was experienced by both Punjab and Bengal states, because remember what Bangladesh now is or was West Pakistan, East Pakistan. So it is mild to say that the mindless partition and the thoughtless partition that was carried out by the British Raj was a simple display of colonial insensitivity, because remember the intent was that they were trying to get out of the country. They were trying to get out of the country as fast as or as soon as they can, and what subsequently followed in their haste was this partition plan. It was the most thoughtless and mindless plan that they could have come up with, even if they tried much harder than what they did. But nonetheless, it was a display of colonial insensitivity. At the end of the day, countrymen were fighting each other on a communal basis, and at the end of the day, a large or vast group of people lost their lives for the colonial insensitivity that was displayed by the British Raj. Right, that was the biggest thing. Remember, the two-nation theory was entirely born out of the idea of religion alone. There wasn't anything much to that idea at all. It was entirely based on the concept of religion. Even the Pakistani founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who fought so bitterly on the communal line that the Muslims need their own country, kind of had this two-nation theory that was entirely being dominated by majority religion majority alone. And with the creation of Bangladesh, that through nation idea, or the two-nation theory, that or the dream that Muhammad Ali Jinnah held for so long, was disintegrated. We took action in 1971, and subsequently East Pakistan became now Bangladesh. So as I said, the two-nation theory was based on religion alone, and that was the idea that Jinnah fought so bitterly for. And with the disintegration and disintegration of erstwhile Pakistan and the creation of Bangladesh in 97 was kind of a blow to that idea also. But that was the past, and later on India went through a tremendous phase of growth, change and progressiveness that in a way kind of helped heal the wounds of partition, but nonetheless there are still memories that are ingrained in our DNA, because there are still people alive who went through that violent phase of our history. Now over the past 3/4 of a century, India's growth has been tremendous. You cannot compare India and Pakistan. You cannot even have Pakistan and India on an equitable tables, because the way that India progressed, the way that India grew, is not even an area where you can compare India with Pakistan. Right, our growth was in our economy. Our technical powers was much better and much adaptive and much in tune with international norms, and a respected voice, and India holds a respected voice on the global stage. Our technological powers can be attested by the fact that India recently launched its own indigenous aircraft carrier. Only a handful of countries in the world can say that they can build their own aircraft carriers to project their naval power. But nonetheless, developments had helped India in healing the wounds of partition, and India's success over the past 3/4 did certainly play an important role in healing those wounds. But nonetheless, the memories are still afresh in certain sections of our country. Now, one question that everybody asks, or one has to agree with the fact that nation cannot know itself without knowing its past. That's the intent of it. If Germany forgets their Nazi past or Hitler's past, then the identity of the country itself is whole unquestionable. That is why you need to recognize, you need to know your past, and India is no exception to that fact also. The idea is that this Partition Horrors Remembrance Day is a step towards recognizing our past and acknowledging our past and ensuring that future generations know about our past. And the idea is that the horrors of the partition must be acknowledged, archived, mourned and commemorated, because at the end of the day you move on from the past and you learn from your past so that the past doesn't repeat itself. And that has to be done through the 4 stages, that is, acknowledge what has happened, archive what has happened, mourn the dead and commemorate the dead, and then you move on to the future. But the idea, the author of this article kind of finds a little bit of sense that India is not doing the erstwhile thing, because we are acknowledging it but not completely. Right, because the idea is that whatever the partition that India went through in 1947 was not only limited to India. There are 2 other countries, or at least 2 countries, that is Pakistan and now Bangladesh, that also went through the same thing with us. Right, that was the intent of it. The British were successfully able to inflict or pit Indians against Indians, and out of it 2 countries came. Later it became 3 countries, that is Pakistan, India and Bangladesh. Now the partition was British Raj or British Empire's attempt to destabilize India as a whole. Their idea was, remember, when 1947 was happening and the haste with which the partition was announced, the British were very hopeful that India was further going to disintegrate into multiple other countries, but that did not happen. The idea, you see that you have you have two parts of a country on either side of your borders, was one of the slight things that many agree and many disagree to a great deal. But nonetheless, the idea was that the British were hoping that India was going to disintegrate into multiple other countries. So the author suggests that it should be more inclusive. We should have included Pakistan, we should have included or invited Bangladesh and Pakistan into these kinds of commemoration or remembrance, so that this is not only the horrors that we are trying to remember or the violence that followed the partition plan in 1947, it is directly related to the British colonial empire, because the colonial past does come back into the picture, because their intent was to inflict maximum damage on the new countries. The making plan that they followed was entirely done on religious divide. The idea was to that whatever the countries that come out of this region in the future shall be divided or will be divided over religious lines, and to greater extent it has worked. Because so the idea is to be more inclusive. You get Bangladesh, you get Pakistan into this remembrance or commemoration day, and you try to hold the British Empire to account and to ensure and educate successive generations on the perils of imperialism, so that they don't repeat the same mistakes that were done to us in the past by other countries, particularly the British Empire. Now, as I said, the country was divided on religious divides. The idea was that the division was in the seed itself. The religious divide idea was sown as soon as the idea of two countries was brought to the main stage. Now, that is the biggest issue that you have to remember. But nonetheless, after 74 years of partition, recognizing our past, commemorating our dead, one should or one would wish that it was more inclusive than what we have right now. And we know the regional political climate in the moment, but the author of this article does suggest that it should have been more inclusive, so that this kind of thing doesn't happen in the future. So moving on to the next article, Afghan President Ghani leaves country as Taliban reach Kabul. So let us discuss Afghanistan in a bit detail. So first thing, we don't know where Ashraf Ghani and most of his entourage, meaning the ministers that supported him, the advisors that guided him over the years, went. Everybody is saying he could have fled to Tajikistan, but we don't have any confirmation. So we are not going to speculate as to where he fled to. Now, Taliban has finally took over Kabul. We have been discussing Taliban, Afghanistan, their advances, the failure of Americans in supporting Afghan National Army, the failure of Afghan National Army itself for a long period of time. So I think it is high time for us to revise the entire timeline of events that subsequently followed. Whatever the experiment that America did or the Western countries did in Afghanistan for 20 years, in turning it into a democratic country, or sow the seeds of freedom as the Americans called it, or sow the seeds of democracy as the Americans called it, had simply failed. Now, Ashraf Ghani, the president himself, along with fellow citizens and foreigners, are fleeing for their lives as Taliban is standing at the gates of Kabul, the capital city of Afghanistan. Now, that is the case with rich Afghans and Afghans who have connections, who have the ability to flee the country. But Afghan citizens, common citizens who are left with the Taliban to reckon with, are afraid that Taliban could reimpose the kind of brutal rule that they are known for prior to 2001, when America ousted Taliban out of their power of seat. Now, the idea is that the idea of women's rights existing in Taliban is gone. The dream of a free society is also gone, because the country is going through a very fluid phase of change right now, and we are seeing people lining up at ATMs to withdraw their life savings and flee the city that they have called home for the last few decades or so. The situation in Kabul is currently that the airport has been closed for civilian population. Helicopters were racing overhead throughout the day to evacuate personnel from US Embassy. The staff of American Embassy were busy burning secret documents. That was the smoke that you see in the photo also. But the situation is that Taliban essentially controls the entirety of Afghanistan, and they have formed an interim Taliban government, and they are promised that they will soon declare an Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan after 20 years of fighting. So let us look at the 20 years of war, and let us understand what were the failures or what were the drawbacks that led Taliban to take control of Afghanistan in a week time. One of the biggest drawbacks or disadvantages that Afghanistan had were its defense security forces. For 20 years, America spent trillions of dollars in training, equipping, and augmenting the Afghan national security forces, but they were suffering themselves with some basic issues. The basic issues were simple. They were uneducated. Second thing was that they weren't paid salaries for months together. And in certain areas, the allegiances were always towards Taliban rather than towards the government that they were working for. America spent trillions of dollars in training and equipping them, but the inherent lack of discipline in the armed forces itself led to them crumbling in front of Taliban. A month back, when President Biden was asked, do you expect Taliban to capture Kabul, he said that Afghan defense forces are a 30 lakh strong army and Taliban is a simple 75,000 men force, and they were trained, they are advancedly equipped and so on and so forth. But we saw what America they essentially give up the first instance of resistance from Taliban. Essentially, Taliban didn't face any resistance from the Afghan security forces in greater areas. So the first issue is there is a lot of corruption in the security forces in Afghanistan. Second thing is many times the Afghan security forces were forced to fight without pay, without equipment, and without food. They couldn't establish a proper hierarchy in the defense forces. Even if it was an established hierarchy, most of the hierarchy was corrupted. Whatever the money that was being flown or being given to the country to support their security forces were eaten up by various people in the government itself, and the lower ranks of the defense forces hardly saw any money or any kind of advanced equipment to fight. As a result of this, many times the local commanders aligned with Taliban forces and they fought against the government itself. The second thing that we discussed in the earlier class was the neglect that Ashraf Ghani government or other governments shown towards warlords and regional tribal leaders. And that was the advantage that the Taliban had, since the government neglected these warlords who were always supporting the Afghan security forces, were left with no support from the government. As a result of it, many of them chose to align with Taliban and fight against government, or in some cases they were left to defend their own territory with their own militias, which they didn't like. By the time the Ashraf Ghani government realized what was happening and tried to gain the support of warlords and regional tribal leaders, it was already too late, as Taliban were marching towards Kabul. And whatever the estimates that US intelligence had or any other nation's intelligence had that Kabul is not going to fall, is turned out to be a simple myth. As I said, the first issue was that they were not properly trained because they were a little bit uneducated. One of the things that American commanders in Afghanistan understood was, in the later stages of the war, was many of the troops were uneducated. As a result of it, they had difficulty in following commands, right? The second biggest damage that the Afghan security forces experienced was people shifting allegiances to Taliban. Right? Defections were high. The people defecting from Afghan National Army to Taliban was so high that they had to bring in certain safeguards to protect American troops and other allied nations' troops who were there training Afghan security forces. As I said, the third and the most significant of all was the level of corruption that went in Afghanistan. It's unimaginable that amount of money could have been if it wasn't eaten up by various high-profile individuals in Afghanistan. It could have actually supported the Afghan National Army and police force in defending their territory against Taliban. Now let us discuss the role of Americans. Americans are being blamed for the fall of Afghanistan into the hands of Taliban. One has to be very pragmatic when they comment on these kinds of things. One, yes, did the Americans abandon the Afghans at the need of their time? The answer is absolutely yes. They did abandon. The way that they negotiated the peace deal itself was centered around protecting American interests rather than a peaceful resolution to the conflict that has been raging the country for the past few decades. We discussed this in detail in earlier classes. Also, the peace agreement was entirely based or hinged on protecting American interests and American soldiers, and not an everlasting peace or a political settlement to the Afghan problem. Second thing, the valid that I kind of agree with the Americans is that they couldn't have stayed there forever. You cannot stay in another country forever. The financial cost, the political cost alone would have caused the government, either it may be a Republican one or a Democratic one, to lose their presidentialship in America in the next elections. The political cost was too high at this point of time. They had spent trillions of dollars. They have lost so many soldiers, young soldiers, and the psychological damage that is experienced by troops that were stationed in Afghanistan still haunts American citizens today. You have to agree with the American side on that perspective. But remember, at various points of time, the Pentagon, various intelligence agencies in America around the world came up with reports stating that no matter how long America has stayed in Afghanistan, or any other country for that matter stayed in Afghanistan, the thing would have been, or the result would have been the same. The moment that occupying force or the support force left Afghanistan and left the Afghan Defense Army or National Army to defend their own territory, their own country, they would crumble within weeks. Because of, as I said, they have their own afflictions, they have their own structural issues, and they are inherently disadvantaged to fight for their territory because of high levels of corruption, high levels of lack of training, lack of structural reforms that needed. The issues are endless, but nonetheless, and if you take out that external force or their external support, because of lack of their discipline in their army or security forces, they don't stand a chance against any force that is fighting against them. So even the Americans said that at various points of time raised this issue with the Afghan government and Afghan National Army. They pointed out to the fact that if you don't change, if the Afghan government doesn't recognize the issues with their army and try to make necessary changes, try to course correct their way of training, their way of approach to problems, their way of approach to finding corruption in their own ranks, there isn't enough things that Americans or any other country can do to support or to make the Afghan National Army a professional army. The second thing, second thing is that the way that Americans approached training Afghan National Army was entirely different. There were other issues, but since it is not relevant to us, but we are not going to go into that. So as of now, Taliban has essentially captured the entirety of Afghanistan in a matter of weeks. Particularly in the last 1 week alone, they captured more than 30 provincial capitals, and finally they took over Kabul, which was the head of the democratically elected government in Afghanistan. As far as what will happen, we have to wait and observe, and we have to wait and observe how India will react to this. So moving on to the next article, 4 more Indian sites were added to Ramsar conservation list. The 4 sites were 2 from Haryana and 2 from Gujarat. These 4 sites have been recognized as wetlands of international importance under the Ramsar Convention. Now, as of today, the total number of Ramsar conservation site or Ramsar Convention sites in India is 46. Earlier it was 42. By the addition of 4 sites, 2 each from Haryana and Gujarat, took that number to 46. The 2 wetlands in Haryana that were recognized under Ramsar Convention are the Sultanpur National Park in Gurgaon and Bindwas Wildlife Sanctuary in Jijhar. Now these 2 have been included in Ramsar list. The Haryana's Bindwas Wildlife Sanctuary is a human-made freshwater wetland. It is the largest wetland in Haryana. It is known for hosting more than 250 bird species throughout the year. They use this site as resting and nesting or roosting site during their migratory phase. The site is known to support at least 10 globally threatened species that included Egyptian vulture, steppe eagle, Paul's fish eagle and black-billed tern. These are the few that are internationally threatened but use the Bindwas Wildlife Sanctuary as their resting and nesting site during their migratory phase. Now the second is the Sultanpur National Park, which supports over 220 species of wildlife, and it hosts both winter migratory birds and local migratory water birds, which are at various stages of their cycles. Either they are resting there, they are roosting there, or they are at their end of their life. Now the Sultanpur National Park is known to host more than 10 of the globally threatened wildlife birds. That includes, as I said, Egyptian vulture, the sociable loping, which is also an endangered and critically endangered species, but the Sultanpur National Park is the home for this variety of globally threatened bird. Now coming to Gujarat, the Tall Lake Wildlife Sanctuary in Gujarat, which lies on Central Asian Flyway. Central Asian Flyway is the migratory highway that birds take through to migrate from one region to the other region. The world has 6 or 7 other flyways which birds yearly and regularly use to travel from one region to other region, that is their migratory pattern path. Now the Tall Lake Wildlife Sanctuary has more than 330 bird species which can be found there. Most of them are local, most of them are endangered, but it is also host to few winter migratory non-local birds. Now the fourth site that was, or the second site in Gujarat, is the Woodbhan wetland in Gujarat, which is internationally important for its bird life, as it provides wintering ground to migratory water birds. It includes over 80 species. Again, they use the Central Asian Flyway to migrate from one region to this wetland area in Gujarat. These are the 4 new Ramsar sites or Ramsar Convention sites that were added to India's list of wetland of significant wetland importance. Now to revise what is Ramsar. Ramsar Convention is named after the Iranian city of Ramsar on the Caspian Sea, where the treaty was signed on February 2nd, 1971. Ramsar Convention is the most critical piece of international legislation or agreement that sole aim is to protect, conserve and develop wetlands in India and around the world. So in India we have currently 46 wetlands that are currently protected under Ramsar Convention. Recently ones were 2 from Haryana and 2 from Gujarat. So moving on to the next article in a bit related to environment again, in the light of the recent IPCC report where we talked about how impactful further deterioration of climate or the overall impact of climate change would have on India. Nearly 6,800 people lost their lives in country over the past 3 years alone due to hydrometeorological calamities such as flash floods, landslips and cyclones. Out of all the devastation that was recorded, West Bengal has recorded the highest death toll among all the states. This was according to Home Ministry. So one thing that we have to understand is natural calamities, particularly hydrological natural calamities, are a common occurrence in India. But what one must be aware of is the intensity and the frequency at which they are happening in the past few years. Scientists around the world attribute these kinds of frequent occurrences and intensities to be the direct fallout of climate change in the world. In the IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Report 2, one of the warnings, or the stark warnings that IPCC report came out with, was that we are going to see the intensity of natural calamities, the frequency of natural calamities incrementally increasing over the next few years until we stop doing whatever we are doing right now and start course correction to prevent the temperatures rising. So that is the issue that we have to keep in mind. This is the cause and effect kind of a relationship that we have with the nature, where the more we exploit the nature, the more damage it inflicts on our property and our lives. So this is what I wanted to point out, just to be made aware that there is a correlation. There are certain events that we are seeing in the past few years that back the scientific theory that climate change is causing natural calamities more frequently with higher intensities. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা। বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি।